Welcome to Marple Whispers, where the faintest murmur conceals a deadly truth. I'm Sean, your guide through a labyrinth of deceit and danger. Every step echoes with secrets, and every shadow hides a motive. Are you ready to unravel the mystery, or become part of it? In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a reclusive widow collapses after sipping her nightly cocoa, dead from what seems like natural causes. But was it? Enter Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster with a mind like a steel trap, unravelling a web of greed, poison, and betrayal. Her stepson and his glamorous new wife arrive like shadows, eyeing her cherished willow cottage as their ticket to fortune. Whispers of bitter tastes, midnight digs in the herb garden, hidden diaries, and a poisoned cat lead to a chilling truth. Arsenic and foxglove brewed in a deadly cup. As suspicions mount and secrets explode in a stormy showdown, watch Marple expose the killer's cold heart. Who killed for a home? Dive into this style mystery, twists that'll grip you till the final confession. Chapter 1. The Shadow over Willow Cottage. The village of St. Mary Mead lay bathed in the golden haze of an autumn afternoon, its cottages huddled together like old friends sharing confidences over garden fences. Chimneys puffed lazy curls of smoke into the crisp air, and the distant chime of the church bell marked the hour with unhurried precision. It was a place where time seemed to linger, where scandals were rare and swiftly smothered beneath layers of polite conversation. Yet, on this particular day, a subtle undercurrent of unease rippled through the lanes, carried on the whispers of villagers who paused in their errands to exchange knowing glances. At the far edge of the village, where the meadows gave way to a tangle of ancient willows, stood Willow Cottage, a modest stone dwelling with diamond-paned windows that glinted like watchful eyes. Its garden, a riot of late-blooming roses and overgrown herbs, spoke of quiet seclusion. Here lived Mrs. Eleanor Hargreaves, a widow of 72 whose life had contracted over the years into a solitary rhythm. Widowed for a decade from her husband, the formidable solicitor Arthur Hargreaves. Eleanor seldom crossed her threshold. Her companions were few, the grizzled tabby cat Tiberius, who dozed by the hearth, and the villagers' occasional deliveries of milk and post. She was not unkind, merely distant, her sharp blue eyes hinting at memories she preferred to keep locked away. It was Mrs. Potts, the stout housekeeper who bustled in thrice weekly, who discovered the tragedy. Arriving at dawn with her basket of cleaning rags and a fresh loaf from the bakery, she found the front door ajar, a detail that set her heart pounding, for Eleanor was meticulous about locks. Pushing inside, she called out in her cheery Devonshire lilt, "Mrs. Hargreaves, it's me, come to chase away the dust bunnies." Silence greeted her, thick and oppressive. Venturing into the drawing room, she froze. There lay Eleanor, crumpled on the Persian rug like a discarded marionette, her nightgown twisted about her frail limbs. Her face was ashen, lips tinged blue, and a faint sheen of sweat clung to her brow. An overturned cup lay nearby, its contents staining the floor with dark cocoa. Mrs. Potts's scream shattered the morning calm, echoing across the meadows and drawing neighbours from their breakfast tables. Dr. Haydock, the village physician with his rumpled tweed jacket and ever-present black bag, arrived on his bicycle within minutes. He knelt beside the body, his stethoscope cold against her chest. "Gone," he pronounced gravely, straightening up with a sigh. "A sudden seizure, I'd wager. Her heart was never strong. and there's signs of acute indigestion. Perhaps something she ate disagreed violently. He glanced at the spilled cocoa, his brow furrowing momentarily before he shook his head. Natural causes, poor soul. She was no spring chicken. Word spread like wildfire through St. Mary Mead, igniting clusters of hushed discussions at the grocer's and the post office. Eleanor had seemed in fine fettle only days earlier, tending her roses with vigour and even snapping at the milkman for tardiness. What then had felled her so abruptly? And why now, mere weeks after the unexpected arrival of her stepson, Reginald Hargreaves? Reginald was a figure from another world, a sleek 40-ish businessman from London's bustling streets, with pomaded hair that gleamed under lamplight and a penchant for tailored suits that whispered of ambition. He had been Arthur's son from a first marriage, tolerated by Eleanor, but never truly embraced. Their relationship was cordial at best, strained by old grievances over inheritance. Arthur had left Willow Cottage solely to his widow, granting Reginald only a pittance of an allowance that barely sustained his extravagant tastes. Now, with Eleanor's passing, the property would revert to him by law, a tidy windfall in these days of rising land values. But it was Reginald's new wife Lydia who truly stirred the village's curiosity. Married in haste just 6 months prior, she was a vision of urban elegance. 30 years old, with raven-black hair coiled in a sophisticated chignon, skin like porcelain, and eyes that held the depth of midnight skies. They had descended upon Willow Cottage unannounced, ostensibly to look in on dear mother, as Reginald put it with a forced smile. Yet the air had crackled with tension during their stay. Villagers recalled overhearing raised voices, drifting from the open windows, arguments about the cottage's future, Eleanor's stubborn refusal to sell, and cryptic mutterings about modern necessities. At the vicarage that afternoon, over cups of steaming Darjeeling and slices of seed cake, the news dominated the tea-table chatter. The Reverend Clement presided with his usual benign vagueness, while his young wife Griselda bubbled with speculation. Seated in a chintz armchair, her knitting needles clicking a steady counterpoint to the conversation, was Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster whose unassuming demeanour masked a mind as keen as a scalpel. With her fluffy white hair and faded blue eyes, she resembled nothing so much as a harmless old tabby. But those who knew her understood the predator beneath. "Poor Eleanor," Miss Marple murmured, her voice soft as she looped another stitch. "Such a sudden end." She always spoke of Willow Cottage as her haven, you know, a place untouched by the rush of the world. One can't help wondering if that very sanctuary became a trap. Griselda leaned forward, eyes wide. "Do you think it wasn't natural, Miss Marple?" The doctor seemed certain. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her gaze drifting to the window where the willows swayed like conspirators. "Doctors are fallible, my dear, and human nature. Well, it's full of surprises. A stepson in need of funds, a new bride with ambitions. It's reminiscent of those old tales where inheritance casts long shadows. I recall a similar case in my youth, down in Loomuth. A widow, a disputed will, and a cup of something far too bitter." The room fell quiet, the only sound the ticking of the mantel clock. Outside, the sun dipped lower, lengthening the shadows over Willow Cottage, where secrets waited to be unearthed. Chapter 2. The Arrival of Strangers. The funeral of Mrs. Eleanor Hargreaves took place on a drizzly Thursday morning, under a sky heavy with leaden clouds that seemed to press down upon the mourners like an unspoken accusation. St. Mary Mead's ancient churchyard, with its crooked headstones and yew trees whispering in the wind, provided a fitting backdrop for the sombre affair. The cortege was small, befitting Eleanor's reclusive nature. A handful of villagers who had known her in passing, the vicar intoning prayers with practised solemnity, and the Hargreaves pair standing apart like figures from a different tableau altogether. Reginald Hargreaves cut a sharp silhouette in his black mourning suit, imported from Savile Row. His face set in a mask of dutiful grief. He stood with one hand resting on the arm of his wife, Lydia, as if anchoring himself against the chill breeze that tugged at the veils and overcoats. Lydia, veiled in fine black lace that did little to obscure her striking features, held a bouquet of white lilies, flowers that Eleanor had detested, preferring the wild exuberance of her garden roses. Yet there they were, pristine and scentless, clutched in Lydia's gloved fingers. As the coffin was lowered into the earth, a murmur rippled through the assembly. Was it truly grief that etched lines on Reginald's brow, or the weight of impending inheritance? Miss Jane Marple, positioned discreetly at the edge of the group in her sensible wool coat and sturdy boots, observed it all with her customary acuity. She noted how Reginald's eyes flicked toward the distant outline of Willow Cottage, visible through the mere mist-shrouded trees, as if already measuring its worth. Lydia, for her part, maintained an air of composed sorrow, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. But as the vicar pronounced the final benediction, Miss Marple caught a fleeting expression cross Lydia's face. A subtle, upward curve of the lips, gone in an instant, like a shadow flitting across a sunlit wall. It was not the smile of relief, Miss Marple thought, but something sharper, more calculating. Ambition wears many masks, she reflected silently, her mind drifting to a long-ago acquaintance in Devon, who had smiled just so at her husband's graveside, only to be unmasked as a poisoner months later. The service concluded with a scattering of earth upon the coffin, and the mourners dispersed in twos and threes, their footsteps muffled on the damp grass. Reginald and Lydia lingered briefly, exchanging polite nods with the vicar, before making their way back to the cottage. The villagers watched them go, whispers trailing in their wake. "Strangers, that's what they are," muttered old Mrs. Price from the bakery, her apron dusted with flour even at such an occasion. "Come down from London like vultures, picking over the bones." Her companion, the postmistress Miss Weatherby, nodded vigorously. "And that Lydia, too pretty by half. Mark my words, there's more to this than meets the eye." By afternoon, the drizzle had cleared, leaving the air fresh and laced with the scent of wet earth. Willow Cottage, now bereft of its long-time occupant, welcomed its new inhabitants with an almost reluctant creak of the garden gate. Reginald unlocked the door with a key that had once been Eleanor's, his movements brisk and businesslike. "Well, my dear," he said to Lydia as they stepped inside, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. "It's ours now." A fresh start. Lydia removed her veil, shaking out her dark hair, and surveyed the room with a critical eye. The drawing-room, with its faded chintz curtains and cluttered bookshelves, seemed dowdy in the pale light filtering through the windows. "Indeed," she replied, her tone smooth as velvet, "but it needs a woman's touch. Those dreary wallpapers must go, something modern, perhaps in eau de Nil, and the garden. We could extend the lawn, turn it into a proper terrace for entertaining. Reginald chuckled, though there was a note of unease in it. Entertaining? In St. Mary Mead, the locals would sooner sip tea with the devil. He moved to the sideboard, pouring himself a generous measure of brandy from a decanter that had been Arthur Hargreaves's favourite. Mother was content with her solitude, but will bring life to this place. Sell off some of the antiques, perhaps. Fund our ventures back in town. Lydia's eyes gleamed as she wandered to the window, gazing out at the overgrown herb bed where foxglove and lavender mingled in wild profusion. Yes, our ventures. You've promised me so much, Reggie. London salons, trips to the continent. This cottage is the key. Prime land, with the railway expansion coming. We could double its value with the right improvements. She turned to him, her expression softening into one of calculated affection. But first, we must play the part. Grieving son and devoted daughter-in-law, the village eyes are upon us. Unbeknownst to them, those eyes were indeed watchful. From her own cottage across the lane, Miss Marple had a clear view of Willow Cottage's facade. She stood at her upstairs window, ostensibly adjusting the lace curtains, but in truth noting every detail. The way Reginald paced the drawing-room, glass in hand, Lydia's graceful movements as she began unpacking trunks delivered earlier that day. New brooms sweep clean, Miss Marple murmured to herself, recalling how her nephew Raymond's second wife had similarly transformed his home after his first's untimely demise. There had been whispers then, too, of undue haste. The inquest followed the next day, held in the stuffy confines of the village hall, where trestle tables bore the remnants of the previous night's WI meeting, forgotten jam jars and a wilting posy. Coroner Mr. Pettigrew, a portly man with a walrus moustache and a penchant for procedural pomp, presided over the proceedings. Dr. Haydock repeated his initial findings. Death due to cardiac failure exacerbated by acute gastric distress. The deceased had a history of indigestion, he stated, consulting his notes. No external injuries, no signs of violence. A natural, if sudden, passing. Inspector Slack, the local detective with his brusque manner and perpetual scowl, concurred. Seated at the front in his ill-fitting uniform, he drummed his fingers on the table. We've examined the premises. Nothing amiss. The housekeeper confirms Mrs. Hargreaves took ill after her evening cocoa, likely a bad batch of milk or something indigestible from supper. He shot a glance at Reginald and Lydia, who sat composedly in the front row. Family relations appear amicable, no motive for foul play. Miss Marple, attending as a concerned neighbour, sat toward the back, her knitting bag on her lap. She listened intently, her mild expression belying the whirl of thoughts beneath. When the coroner invited questions, she raised a tentative hand. If I may, sir, about the cocoa. Was it analysed? The room stirred. Inspector Slack snorted. No need, Miss Marple. It's a straightforward case, but the coroner, perhaps out of courtesy to the elderly lady, pressed Dr. Haydock. Well, doctor? Haydock cleared his throat. The cup was empty, spilled on the floor. But the residue showed nothing untoward. Just cocoa, milk, sugar. Lydia, under her veil once more, inclined her head slightly. That same fleeting smile ghosting her features as the verdict was delivered. Accidental death by natural causes. Miss Marple caught it again, and a chill ran down her spine. Smiles at inquests, she thought. Like that case in Much Benham, where the young wife grinned through her tears, only for arsenic to be found in the sugar bowl. As the hall emptied, villagers clustered outside, the air buzzing with commentary. "Too quick, if you ask me," said Mr. Pye, the effete antique dealer with a flair for dramatics. "Eleanor was spry as a sparrow last market day. And those London folk, shifty eyes, the lot of them." Miss Hartnell, the spinster with a nose for scandal, nodded. "I heard Reginald arguing with her the night before, voices raised about selling the place, and Lydia preparing the cocoa herself, insisting on it as a kind gesture. Kind, my foot!" This tidbit reached Miss Marple's ears as she made her way home, courtesy of Dolly Bantry, who had attended the inquest with her usual forthright curiosity. Over sherry at Gossington Hall that evening, Dolly relayed the gossip with relish. "It's all over the village, Jane," Mrs. Potts told Miss Weatherby confidentially. "Eleanor complained of a bitter taste in her cocoa that fatal night. Said it was the new milk from the dairy, but Potts swears the milk was fresh as daisies." Miss Marple sipped her sherry, her eyes thoughtful. "Bitter cocoa! How intriguing! And Lydia prepared it. One wonders why a guest would take such a task upon herself." Dolly leaned forward, her ample bosom heaving with excitement. "Exactly," Potts said. Lydia shooed her out of the kitchen, claiming it a surprise for Eleanor. Then, next morning, the poor woman dead as a doornail. The conversation turned to the Hargreaves' backgrounds, pieced together from village lore and Dolly's own inquiries. Reginald, it seemed, had dabbled in imports, silks and spices from the East, but his business teetered on the brink, burdened by debts. Lydia, née Beaumont, hailed from the fringes of London's theatrical world, a former actress who had traded footlights for matrimony. "Ambitious, that one," Dolly opined. "Married Reggie after a whirlwind courtship. Whispers of her pushing him to claim his due from Eleanor." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving connections. "Human nature, Dolly. Greed cloaked in affection. I recall a play I saw in London years ago. The Fatal Cup, it was called. A young wife poisons her mother-in-law's tea for the family fortune. Art imitating life, or vice versa? As twilight deepened, a curious incident unfolded at Willow Cottage, one that would fuel the village's suspicions further. Mrs. Potts, returning to collect her final wages and pack her meagre belongings, found herself alone in the kitchen with Lydia. Reginald had stepped out to the Blue Boar for a pint, seeking respite from the day's tedium. Lydia, unpacking china with efficient grace, turned to the housekeeper. "You've been loyal to Eleanor, Mrs. Potts. We appreciate that. Here's your pay, with a little extra for your troubles." Potts, a woman of sturdy build and forthright tongue, pocketed the envelope with a grunt. "Loyal, aye, she were a good mistress, rest her soul, but that last night, queer it were." Lydia paused, her hand hovering over a teacup. "Queer? How so?" Potts hesitated, then the words tumbled out. "The cocoa, ma'am. She rang for me after you'd gone up. Said it tasted off, bitter-like. Blamed the milk, but I tasted a drop from the jug myself later. Sweet as honey." Lydia's face remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened on the cup. Imagination, perhaps. Grief does strange things. Potts shook her head. Nay, she were poorly straight after. Gasping, clutching her stomach. "I wanted to fetch the doctor then, but she said it'd pass." With that, Potts gathered her shawl and departed, her footsteps heavy on the gravel path. Unseen by either woman, young Tommy Pierce, the butcher's boy delivering a joint for supper, overheard the exchange through the open window. By morning, the tale had spread. At the grocer's, the smithy, even the vicarage. "Bitter cocoa," the villagers echoed. And who made it but the new Mrs. Hargreaves? Miss Marple, tending her own garden that evening, pruned her roses with deliberate snips of her secateurs. The air was redolent with the perfume of damask blooms, a stark contrast to the poisonous undercurrents she sensed. Tiberius, Eleanor's cat, had wandered over, rubbing against her ankles with a plaintive meow. "Poor creature," she cooed, stroking his fur. "Orphaned now, but cats know things, don't they? They sense malice." Her thoughts turned to poisons, subtle ones that could taint a drink without immediate detection. Arsenic, perhaps, or digitalis from the foxglove in Eleanor's herb bed. Such a useful plant for heart ailments, Miss Marple mused aloud, but deadly in excess. And Lydia, digging in the garden at odd hours. Mr. Finch mentioned it to the milkman. As night fell, Willow Cottage's lights glowed warmly, belying the chill within. Reginald and Lydia dined on the cold ham and salad, their conversation stilted. "The inquest went well," Reginald ventured, spearing a tomato. Lydia smiled, that same enigmatic curve. "Yes, darling, all settled. Now, about those renovations." But beneath the table, her fingers twisted a napkin, betraying a tension that no amount of poise could hide. In her cosy sitting room, Miss Marple settled by the fire with a cup of Ovaltine. Untampered, she hoped wryly. Her knitting resumed its rhythmic click, but her mind raced ahead, piecing together fragments, the bitter cocoa, the hasty inheritance, the actress's charm masking deeper motives. Strangers indeed, she thought. But strangers leave traces, if one knows where to look. The village slept, but suspicions stirred like leaves in the wind, promising revelations in the days to come. Willow Cottage, once a haven, now harboured secrets that threatened to burst forth, drawing the noose tighter around the guilty. Chapter 3. Threads of Suspicion. The morning after the inquest dawned with a deceptive brightness, the sun casting long golden fingers across the dew-soaked lawns of St. Mary Mead. Willow Cottage stood sentinel at the village's edge, its stone walls warmed by the light, yet an air of disquiet clung to it like ivy. The villagers, ever attuned to the pulse of their small world, went about their tasks with one ear cocked for fresh gossip. The sudden death of Eleanor Hargreaves, coupled with the swift occupation of her home by Reginald and Lydia, had stirred the quiet lanes into a hive of speculation. Every glance toward the cottage carried a question. Was it truly a natural passing, or had darker forces been at play? Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of Earl Grey and a slice of toast spread thinly with marmalade, pondered the matter as she read the Morning Post. Her cottage, a neat affair with chintz curtains and a profusion of geraniums in the window boxes, was a haven of order. Yet her mind thrived on the chaos of human motives. The inquest's verdict of natural causes had satisfied Inspector Slack, whose impatience for complexity was legendary, but it left Miss Marple with a nagging unease. "Verdicts are tidy things," she murmured to her tabby cat, who had wandered over from Willow Cottage and now claimed a patch of sunlight on the rug. "But life is seldom so neat. A bitter cocoa, a disputed inheritance. Oh, Tiberius, there's a pattern here, if only I can trace it." Her musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was young Griselda, the vicar's wife, her cheeks flushed with the excitement of a fresh tidbit. "Jane, you'll never guess," she exclaimed, flopping into a chair with a rustle of her modish skirt. Mrs. Potts was at the vicarage last night, after collecting her things from the cottage. She's all in a tizzy. Says she found something odd in Eleanor's desk while tidying up. A letter, half-written, addressed to her solicitor in London. Something about changing her will. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained mild. Changing her will, you say? Did Mrs. Potts read it? Griselda shook her head, her curls bouncing. Only a glimpse. Lydia came in and snatched it away, claiming it was private. But Potts swears it mentioned a charity, not Reginald. And here's the kicker. Eleanor wrote it the day before she died. The news set Miss Marple's thoughts spinning like the wool on her spindle. A will altered at the 11th hour. A stepson poised to inherit. A new wife with ambitions. It was a tapestry woven with threads of greed, familiar from countless village dramas she had quietly observed. Most intriguing, she said softly, pouring Griselda a cup of tea. And Mrs. Potts, did she mention anything else? About the cocoa, perhaps? Or Lydia's behaviour? Griselda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Oh, yes. She said Lydia was in the garden the night before Eleanor fell ill, digging near the herb bed. Potts saw her from the kitchen window, thought it odd at such an hour. Lydia claimed she was planting tulip bulbs. But who plants in the dark? And then there's Tiberius, Eleanor's cat. He's been off his feed since her death, skulking about like he knows something. Miss Marple glanced at the cat, who blinked back with enigmatic green eyes. Animals sense more than we credit, she remarked. I recall a case in Lower Barton, where a dog refused to eat after its master was poisoned. The culprit was the cook, lacing the stew with rat poison. She paused, her mind turning to the herb bed. Foxglove grew there, she knew. Digitalis, a heart stimulant in small doses, but a silent killer in excess. Could Lydia have harvested its leaves, masking their bitterness in cocoa? The thought lingered like a shadow. Determined to gather more threads, Miss Marple donned her best tweed hat and set out for Willow Cottage under the pretext of offering condolences. The walk was pleasant, the lanes lined with blackberry bushes heavy with fruit, but her mind was far from pastoral delights. She recalled Eleanor's pride in her garden, her knowledge of herbs bordering on the apothecary's art. Such a pity, Miss Marple mused aloud, when knowledge becomes a weapon. At the cottage, Lydia greeted her with polished courtesy, her black mourning dress accentuating her pale beauty. The drawing-room, though still cluttered with Eleanor's old-fashioned furnishings, bore signs of change. A new vase of forced hothouse roses on the table, a stack of architectural plans tucked beside the armchair. Reginald was absent, called to London on urgent business, Lydia explained with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Do sit, Miss Marple, she said, gesturing to a chair. Tea, or perhaps something stronger? Eleanor kept a fine sherry. Miss Marple declined with a gentle shake of her head, settling into the chair with her knitting bag at her side. Her eyes roamed the room, noting details, the faint cocoa stain on the carpet near the hearth, stubbornly resistant to Mrs. Potts's scrubbing. A new bottle of tonic on the mantel, its label curiously blank. A faint smell of lavender, perhaps from the herb bed outside. You must find this all quite overwhelming, she said, her tone sympathetic, taking on such a dear old place with all its memories. Lydia's laugh was light, almost musical, but it carried an edge. Oh, Eleanor was set in her ways, bless her. This cottage is charming, but so dated. Reggie and I plan to modernise, open up the rooms perhaps at a conservatory. It's what the place needs to thrive." She smoothed her skirt, her fingers lingering on the fabric. Eleanor loved it, of course, but she was stubborn about change. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. She was devoted to her garden, I recall. "Those roses and the herbs, quite a passion. Did you share it?" Lydia's smile tightened. "Not really. I'm more for city life, London's theatres, the bustle. But I did try to help with the garden, planted some bulbs the other night, in fact, at midnight." Miss Marple's question was gentle, almost absent-minded, but Lydia's hand froze on her teacup. "Oh, you've heard that tale?" "Just a whim, really. The moonlight was so lovely, and I couldn't sleep." Her recovery was swift, but Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in her eyes. "People do talk," she said mildly, "and in a village every detail grows wings." Like the cocoa, such a kind gesture, preparing it for Eleanor that last night. Lydia set down her cup with a faint clink. Yes, I thought it would comfort her. She was so fond of it. Her voice was steady, but her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. Miss Marple smiled, tucking away her knitting. "You're very thoughtful, my dear. I mustn't keep you. I only wish to pay my respects." As she stepped into the garden, Miss Marple paused by the herb bed, where Foxglove stood tall among the lavender and thyme. Old Mr. Finch, the gardener, was raking leaves nearby, his weathered face creased with disapproval. "Morning, miss," he grunted. "Sad business, this." Mrs. Hargreaves loved her herbs, knew 'em like a chemist. That new Mrs., though, digging here at all hours. "Said it was bulbs, but I ain't seen no tulips sprouting." He lowered his voice. "And the cat, poor Tiberius. Found him retching in the bushes day after she died. Poison, I reckon." Rat bait. Maybe Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. "Poison? How dreadful! Have you noticed anything else? Unusual?" Finch scratched his chin. "Well, now you mention it, there's a patch of earth disturbed yonder, under the foxglove. Looked like summat was buried, then dug up quick-like. Didn't think much of it till now." Promising to send him a jar of her homemade quince jelly, Miss Marple took her leave, her mind abuzz. Foxglove, a missing cat, a disturbed patch of earth. It was a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit neatly. Back in the village, she stopped at the post office, where Miss Weatherby, ever eager to share, relayed another morsel. "You'll never believe it, Miss Marple. Young Tommy Pierce says he saw Reginald arguing with a man in a flashy car outside the cottage night before Eleanor died. Some London type, Croft his name was. Reggie's business partner, they say, and not a savoury sort." The plot thickened like a winter fog. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the Blue Boar Inn, where the locals gathered to dissect the day's events over pints of ale. The inn, with its low beams and smoky hearth, was a crucible of village opinion. And today it simmered. Mr. Pye, the antique dealer, held court at a corner table, his voice dripping with theatrical flair. "Reginald's in over his head," he declared, swirling his glass. "That import business of his, silks and such, is bleeding money. Croft's been hounding him for repayment, and now with the cottage his, he's talking of selling it to cover debts. Lydia's behind it, mark my words, she's got plans for that land." Miss Hartnell, perched nearby, sniffed. "Plans indeed. She's no mourner, that one. I saw her at the grocer's, buying fancy teas and talking of turning the place into a hotel. A hotel in St. Mary Mead. Eleanor would turn in her grave?" Miss Marple listened, her face a mask of polite interest, but her mind catalogued every word. Reginald's debts, Croft's pressure, Lydia's ambitions. It was a triangle of motives, each pointing to the cottage as the prize. But the cocoa remained the linchpin. She recalled a case in her youth, where a bitter taste in a nightcap had masked strychnine. Could arsenic, or perhaps digitalis, have worked its way into Eleanor's cup? And why had Lydia been so insistent on preparing it herself? That evening, as the village settled into twilight, a new clue emerged. Miss Marple, strolling past the churchyard, encountered Mrs. Potts, who was laying a wreath on Eleanor's grave. The housekeeper's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling. "It ain't right, Miss Marple," she whispered. "I keep thinking on that letter." If Eleanor meant to cut Reginald out, why'd she die so sudden? And that Lydia, she was always hovering, watching. Once I caught her reading Eleanor's old diary, pages about the cottage and her plans. She shut it quick when she saw me. Miss Marple patted her arm. "You've done well to notice, Mrs. Potts' diaries can be dangerous things. They reveal too much." As she walked home, the pieces began to align. A will, a diary, a poison. But the evidence was circumstantial, a web of whispers and suspicions. She needed something tangible, something to pull the threads tight. At her cottage, she sat by the fire, Tiberius curled at her feet. The cat's presence was a reminder of Eleanor's solitary life, and his recent illness a warning. "Poison," Miss Marple mused, her needles clicking. "It's always poison that betrays the heart's intent." But whose heart, and why now? She thought of Lydia's midnight gardening, the disturbed earth, the bitter cocoa. "It's like knitting a lace shawl," she told the cat. "One wrong stitch, and the pattern unravels. We must find that stitch, Tiberius." Outside, the village slept, but Willow Cottage glowed with lamplight, its new occupants plotting their future. In the shadows, Miss Marple's quiet resolve grew stronger. The threads of suspicion were weaving together, and soon she knew they would form a net to catch a killer. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Village. The days following Eleanor Hargreaves's funeral saw Saint. Mary Mead cloaked in an autumnal hush, as if the village itself held its breath, awaiting the next revelation. The leaves turned crimson and gold, carpeting the lanes with a brittle rustle, while the air grew sharp with the promise of frost. Willow Cottage, now firmly in the grasp of Reginald and Lydia Hargreaves, stood as a silent witness to the village's growing unease. The inquest's verdict of natural causes had done little to quell the murmurs that swirled like eddies in the River Mead. Murmurs of bitter cocoa, midnight gardening, and a will that might have changed everything. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her cosy cottage with its neat rows of dahlias and a fire crackling in the grate, felt the pulse of these whispers as keenly as she felt the rhythm of her knitting needles. Her morning began with a visit from Dolly Bantry, who arrived with a basket of apples and a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "Jane, it's positively thrilling," Dolly declared, settling into a chintz armchair with a cup of tea. "The village is abuzz." Mrs. Weatherby at the post office had a letter. An anonymous one slipped under her door at dawn. It told her to check the apothecary's records for Lydia's purchases. And you'll never guess what she found. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted, though her expression remained serene. "Do tell, Dolly." I find anonymous letters so revealing, not of their writer perhaps, but of the truths they nudge into the light. Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Arsenic, Jane. Lydia bought a tin of it from Mr. Jenkins last week, claiming it was for rats in the cottage. Rats in Eleanor's spotless home. Preposterous!" The word arsenic hung in the air like a discordant note. Miss Marple's mind raced, recalling cases from her vast mental archive. Cases where a pinch of white powder had turned a comforting drink into a deadly elixir. "Arsenic," she mused, her needles pausing. "It mimics gastric distress, doesn't it? A bitter taste, perhaps, but easily masked in cocoa with a generous spoonful of sugar. And Eleanor did complain of bitterness that final night. She sipped her tea, her thoughts weaving a pattern. Did Mr. Jenkins confirm the purchase? "Oh, yes," Dolly nodded vigorously. "He was reluctant at first. Professional discretion, you know. But Mrs. Weatherby can be quite persuasive." He admitted Lydia came in, all charm and smiles, and bought the stuff 3 days before Eleanor's death. Said she was worried about vermin in the cellar. But Jane, there's more. Tommy Pierce overheard Reginald at the Blue Boar, boasting about turning the cottage into a boutique hotel. A hotel! Can you imagine? Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Reginald always had grand ideas, even as a boy visiting his father here. But grand ideas require funds, and his import business, I hear, is faltering. A cottage like Eleanor's, with its land so near the proposed railway extension, would fetch a handsome sum. She set down her cup, her eyes distant. And Lydia, with her theatrical flair. Such women often play their parts to perfection, don't they? I recall a case in Saint-Honoré, where an actress poisoned her rival's wine for a role. The motive was ambition. Cloaked in smiles, Dolly shivered, though the hoop room was warm. You think Lydia did it, then? For the cottage? Miss Marple shook her head gently. I think nothing yet, my dear. But I observe, and observations like stitches must be gathered carefully before the pattern emerges. Determined to gather more threads, Miss Marple resolved to visit the apothecary herself. Mr. Jenkins, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, ran his shop with the precision of a clockmaker. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, the air heavy with the scent of lavender oil and carbolic. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he greeted, polishing a glass vial. "A sad business about Mrs. Hargreaves. What can I do for you?" She smiled, her demeanour as unassuming as a sparrow. "Just a touch of liniment for my rheumatism, Mr. Jenkins, and perhaps a word about poor Eleanor. I hear there was talk of pest control at the cottage." Her tone was light, but her eyes missed nothing. The slight tightening of his mouth, the nervous adjustment of his glasses. Jenkins hesitated, then sighed. "You've heard, then?" "Yes, Mrs. Hargreaves, the younger one, bought a small tin of arsenic. Said the cellar was overrun. I warned her to be careful, of course. Nasty stuff, even in small doses. But she was insistent, paid in cash, and left." He leaned closer, his voice low. "Between you and me, Miss Marple, I thought it odd. Eleanor kept that place spotless. Never a rat in sight." Miss Marple nodded, tucking the liniment into her basket. "How curious. And this was when, exactly?" Jenkins consulted his ledger. "Wednesday last, 3 days before the poor lady passed." As she thanked him and stepped into the street, Miss Marple's mind churned. Arsenic, purchased so close to Eleanor's death, and a cellar free of vermin. It was a piece of the puzzle, sharp-edged and gleaming. The village, meanwhile, buzzed with its own investigations. At the Blue Boar Inn, where the air was thick with pipe smoke and the clink of pint glasses, Reginald had taken to holding court. His city Polish stood out against the rough-hewn locales, his voice carrying a forced joviality. "The cottage will be a gem," he declared to a cluster of farmers and shopkeepers. "Lydia's got vision. Terraced gardens, modern plumbing, perhaps a small hotel for city folk wanting a country escape." Mother would have approved in time. But his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly as he lifted his glass. And his eyes darted to the door as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. Among the listeners was Mr. Pye, the antique dealer whose sharp tongue and sharper instincts made him a keen observer. Sipping his sherry, he muttered to Miss Hartnell, "He's dreaming, that one. His business is a shambles. Croft was here last week, breathing down his neck for money owed." "And Lydia? She's the one pulling the strings." "I saw her at the stationer's, buying plans for renovations before." Eleanor was cold. Miss Hartnell, her bonnet askew, nodded grimly. "And that diary of Eleanor's, Mrs. Potts says it's gone missing from the desk. Lydia was seen leafing through it, you know, days before the end, full of Eleanor's thoughts on the cottage and her fears about that woman, meaning Lydia, no doubt." The whispers reached Miss Marple via the vicarage, where Griselda relayed them over afternoon scones. "It's like a novel, Jane. A diary, arsenic, a missing cat. Oh, and speaking of Tiberius, he's turned up again looking poorly. Mr. Finch swears he saw him retching near the herb bed, same place Lydia was digging." Miss Marple's fingers paused on her scone. "Poor creature. Animals know when something's amiss. I must have a word with Mr. Finch." That afternoon she found the gardener at Willow Cottage, pruning the roses with a scowl. "Afternoon, miss," he greeted, wiping sweat from his brow. "This place ain't the same without her." Mrs. Hargreaves knew every bloom by name. That Lydia, though, she's got no patience for it. Wants to pave over the herb bed for a patio. He gestured to the patch of earth, still disturbed from Lydia's nocturnal efforts. "Found a shard of glass there yesterday, buried shallow. Looked like it came from a vial, not a bottle. Odd, ain't it?" Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained placid. "Very odd, Mr. Finch. And Tiberius, how is he faring?" Finch's scowl deepened. "Weak as a kitten, miss. I took him to the vet in Much Benham. Says he's got something toxic in him. Maybe ate summat bad from the garden. I'm keeping him at mine till he's right." As she thanked him, Miss Marple's mind raced. A vial in the herb bed, a sick cat, arsenic in the apothecary's ledger. It was a constellation of clues, each pointing to Lydia. But other threads tangled the picture. Mrs. Potts, for instance, had her own grievances. She'd confided to Miss Weatherby about unpaid wages, a sore point with Eleanor. And then there was Croft, Reginald's business partner, a shadowy figure whose visit had coincided with Eleanor's final days. Could he have played a role, perhaps pressuring Reginald into desperate measures? To test the waters, Miss Marple paid a call on Dr. Haydock, whose surgery was a cluttered haven of medical texts and faded diplomas. The doctor, puffing on his pipe, welcomed her with a wry smile. "Come to play detective, Miss Marple." "Slack's convinced it's all above board, but I know that look in your eye." She smiled demurely. "Merely a concerned neighbour, doctor. I was wondering about Eleanor's symptoms. Gastric distress, you said? Could it have been something ingested beyond bad milk?" Haydock frowned, tapping his pipe. "Possible, I suppose. Arsenic or digitalis could cause such symptoms. Vomiting, heart irregularities." but the cocoa residue showed nothing conclusive, and we've no cause to exhume the body. Still, he hesitated, then leaned closer. There was a faint metallic taste in the cup's dregs, not quite right for cocoa. I didn't press it. Slack's not one for hunches. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. A metallic taste, arsenic perhaps, or something subtler. As she left, she passed the churchyard, where a fresh wreath on Eleanor's grave caught her eye. A note tucked among the flowers read, "Rest easy, dear friend." It was unsigned, but the handwriting matched Mrs. Potts's heavy scrawl. Loyalty or guilt? That evening, a minor scandal erupted. Young Tommy Pierce, delivering the Evening Post, reported a strange occurrence at Willow Cottage. He'd seen Lydia in the drawing room, rifling through a desk drawer, pulling out papers and burning one in the fireplace. "Looked like a letter," he told Miss Weatherby, wide-eyed. "She didn't see me, but she was muttering something fierce. 'No one must know,' she said." The news spread like wildfire, reaching Miss Marple as she sipped her nightly Ovaltine. She set down her cup, her mind alight with possibilities. A burned letter, a diary gone missing, a vial in the garden. Each was a whisper of deceit, pointing to Lydia, but clouded by other suspects. Mrs. Potts's bitterness, Croft's threats, even Dr. Haydock's reluctance to push the investigation, all were threads in a tapestry yet to be fully woven. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, watching the lights of Willow Cottage flicker through the trees. Tiberius, curled on her rug, let out a low mew, as if sensing the gathering storm. "Whispers become shouts in time," she murmured, her needles clicking like a metronome. "And in St. Mary Mead, no secret stays buried long." The village slept, but its pulse quickened, each rumour tightening the web around Willow Cottage. Miss Marple knew the truth was close, hidden in the mundane details of a quiet life. A life now silenced, but still speaking through the clues it left behind. Chapter 5. The gathering storm, the skies over St. Mary Mead darkened as October deepened, with storm clouds rolling in from the west, their edges tinged with the sullen glow of a fading sun. The village, usually a tapestry of tranquil routines, thrummed with an undercurrent of tension, as if the very air sensed the unravelling of secrets within Willow Cottage. The whispers that had begun as faint murmurs, about bitter cocoa, a missing diary, and a vial in the herb bed, had swelled into a chorus of suspicion, each note pointing toward Lydia Hargreaves, the enigmatic new wife whose polished charm seemed to mask a colder intent. Yet Miss Jane Marple, ever cautious, knew that truth was a slippery thing, often obscured by the shadows of lesser motives. In her cottage, where the scent of wood smoke mingled with the faint perfume of her late-blooming roses, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome against the growing storm outside. The key revelations of the past days, Lydia's purchase of arsenic, the burned letter, Tiberius's illness, formed a pattern in her mind, intricate as the lace shawl taking shape in her hands. But patterns, she knew, could deceive. A single misplaced stitch could unravel the whole. "It's like a village dance," she mused to herself, stroking Tiberius, who had taken up residence on her hearthrug. Everyone steps in time, but one false move betrays the leader. Her reflections were interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. It was Mrs. Potts, the former housekeeper, her face pale beneath her woolen scarf, her eyes darting nervously as if pursued by unseen spectres. "Miss Marple, I had to come," she said, clutching her basket as she stepped inside. It's not right. What's happening at the cottage? I can't sleep for thinking of it." Miss Marple gestured to a chair, pouring tea with a steady hand. "Sit, Mrs. Potts, and tell me, what troubles you now?" The housekeeper's hands trembled as she accepted the cup. "It's that diary, miss." Eleanor's diary. I saw it again, hidden in Lydia's sewing basket when I went to fetch my old apron yesterday. She thought I'd left, but I doubled back for my gloves. There it was, tucked under some embroidery silks, with pages torn out. And then, last night, I heard shouting, Reginald and Lydia, in the drawing-room. He was saying, "What did you do, Lydia?" "What did you do?" She didn't answer, just laughed, cold-like. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her expression remained gentle. "A diary, you say? And torn pages, most intriguing. Did you see what was written?" Mrs. Potts shook her head. "No, miss, but I know Eleanor wrote in it daily. Her thoughts, her fears." She didn't trust Lydia, called her that scheming creature more than once. And now, with the diary hidden, it's as if Lydia's covering something. The housekeeper's words added a new thread to Miss Marple's tapestry. A diary, once missing, now concealed. A heated argument overheard in the night. She recalled a case in Chipping Cleghorn, where a hidden journal had revealed a motive for murder. Its pages a map to the killer's heart. "Thank you, Mrs. Potts," she said softly. "You've been most observant. And the cocoa, did Eleanor mention anything more about that bitter taste?" Mrs. Potts nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She did, miss. Said it wasn't just bitter, it burned her throat, made her feel queer. I offered to make a fresh cup, but she waved me off, said she'd sleep it off. Next morning she was gone." Her eyes filled with tears. "I should have done more, miss. I should have called the doctor then." And there Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. A burning sensation, gastric distress, a sudden collapse. Symptoms that pointed not only to arsenic, but possibly to something subtler, like aconite, or even digitalis from the foxglove in Eleanor's herb. "Bet, you did what you could," she said kindly, "but we must be thorough now. Tell no one of this, Mrs. Potts, and keep your eyes open." As the housekeeper departed, the first raindrops pattered against the windows, heralding the storm's arrival. Miss Marple decided to act. She would host a small tea at her cottage, inviting the key players in this unfolding drama, Reginald, Lydia, Mrs. Potts and Dr. Haydock, with Mr. Croft, Reginald's business partner, as an unexpected addition. A gathering of suspects, she thought wryly, is like stirring a pot. Something always rises to the surface. The tea was set for the following afternoon, a Sunday when the village slowed to a near standstill. Miss Marple's parlour, with its polished mahogany table and vases of late chrysanthemums, exuded an air of homely warmth, belying the tension she intended to provoke. She enlisted Dolly Bantry to help, knowing her friend's forthright nature would keep the conversation lively. "It's positively Machiavellian, Jane," Dolly said, arranging scones on a tiered stand. "Inviting them all here, as if for a social call, when you're really setting a trap." "Not a trap, Dolly," Miss Marple corrected, adjusting a doily. "Merely an opportunity for truth to slip out. People reveal themselves when they're off guard, especially over tea. I recall a tea party in Netherwallop, where a murderer betrayed himself by dropping a sugar cube in his panic. The guests arrived promptly at 4, their faces a study in contrasts. Reginald, in a tweed jacket that strained slightly at the seams, looked haggard, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Lydia, radiant in a tailored grey dress that offset her mourning black, carried herself with the poise of a stage actress, though her smile was a touch too bright. Mrs. Potts, nervous and fidgety, clutched her handbag as if it were a lifeline. Dr. Haydock, puffing his pipe, exuded a genial scepticism, while Mr. Croft, a lean, sharp-featured man with slicked-back hair and a suit that screamed London money, lounged with a faintly predatory air. Miss Marple greeted them with her usual disarming warmth, ushering them to the table where tea steamed in a silver pot and plates of sandwiches and scones beckoned. "Such a sad time," she began, pouring with practised grace. "But it does the heart good to come together, don't you think?" Eleanor was so fond of her little rituals, her herb teas, her nightly cocoa. She paused, her eyes flickering to Lydia. "You were kind to prepare it for her that last evening, my dear. From the new tin, I believe." Lydia's hand paused on her teacup, her smile unwavering, but her eyes narrowing slightly. "Yes, Miss Marple." A small gesture to cheer her. She loved her cocoa, though she complained it tasted odd that night. The milk, perhaps? Her voice was smooth, but Reginald shifted uncomfortably beside her, his fingers drumming on the table. Dr. Haydock cleared, his throat. "The milk was fresh. I checked with the dairy. But these old houses, sometimes the tins get musty." Could have been that he glanced at Lydia, then away, as if unwilling to press the point. Miss Marple nodded, offering a plate of cucumber sandwiches. "How curious! And you, Mr. Croft? Did you know Eleanor well? I understand you visited the cottage shortly before her passing?" Croft's smile was all teeth, like a fox caught in a henhouse. "Barely, Miss Marple. Business with Reggie, you see. Imports, silks, spices. Tough times, but we're managing." His eyes flicked to Reginald, who looked away, his jaw tight. The conversation turned to the cottage's future, with Lydia steering it deftly. "We're planning improvements," she said, her voice bright. "A modern kitchen, perhaps a conservatory. Eleanor's tastes were quaint, but the land has potential." Mrs. Potts, emboldened by a second cup of tea, spoke up, her voice sharp. "Mrs. Hargreaves loved that cottage as it was. She wrote about it, you know, in her diary. Said it was her sanctuary, not to be sold off to strangers." Lydia's smile froze, and Reginald coughed into his napkin. "Diary?" he said, his voice strained. "Mother's scribblings. Hardly worth keeping." But Mrs. Potts pressed on, her eyes glinting. "She wrote about you both, sir. And about fears of being pushed out. I saw that diary, Mrs., in your sewing basket yesterday. Why hide it?" The room stilled, the only sound the patter of rain against the windows. Lydia's laugh was brittle. "My sewing basket? Really, Mrs. Potts, you're mistaken. I've no use for old diaries. Perhaps you mislaid it in your haste to leave." But her fingers twisted the edge of her napkin, and Miss Marple noted the faint flush creeping up her neck. Dr. Haydock, sensing the tension, attempted levity. "Diaries, eh? Full of secrets, no doubt. Like my patient's charts, always more than meets the eye." But his eyes lingered on Lydia, as if recalling that metallic taste in the cocoa dregs. Croft, meanwhile, leaned back, his gaze sliding between Reginald and Lydia. "Secrets indeed. Reggie, you've got a gold mine in that cottage. Sell it, pay off the debts, and we're back in business. No need for all this fuss." His tone was casual, but there was a hardness beneath it, a reminder of the pressure he wielded. Miss Marple steered the conversation to safer ground, chatting about village matters, but her mind catalogued every gesture, every word. Lydia's defensiveness, Reginald's unease, Mrs. Potts's accusation, Croft's veiled threats. They were pieces of a puzzle, each edged with suspicion. As the guests departed, the storm broke in earnest, thunder rolling over the meadows like a warning. That evening, Miss Marple visited Mr. Finch, who was nursing Tiberius at his small cottage. The cat, still weak, lay on a blanket, his eyes dull. "Vet says it's poison, miss," Fincher said grimly. "Not enough to kill him, thank goodness, but summat nasty. Found him near the herb bed, where that vile shard was." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions hardening. "I'd like to see that bed again, Mr. Finch. Tomorrow, perhaps, in daylight, the next morning, under a sky still heavy with clouds, Miss Marple and Finch examined the herb bed. The disturbed earth was evident, a patch where foxglove stood tall, its purple bells swaying in the breeze. "Here," Finch said, pointing to a spot where the soil was freshly turned. "Looks like summat was buried, then dug up. That shard I found, it's gone now. Reckon someone took it." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Foxglove, digitalis, could weaken a heart, mimic illness, and kill if dosed correctly. And a vial, perhaps containing its essence, buried and retrieved. It was a damning clue, but not yet proof. She thanked Finch, promising to send him a cutting from her own roses, and returned home to ponder. That night, the storm raged on, lightning illuminating Willow Cottage in stark flashes. Inside, Reginald confronted Lydia, his voice carrying through an open window to the ears of a passing villager, young Tommy Pierce. "What have you done, Lydia?" he demanded, his tone raw with fear. "That diary, the arsenic, what are we tangled in?" Lydia's reply was a low murmur, inaudible but chilling, followed by the slam of a door. Tommy reported this to Miss Weatherby, who relayed it to Miss Marple over breakfast the next day. "It's unravelling, Jane," Miss Weatherby said, her eyes wide. "Reginald suspects her, doesn't he? And that diary, why burn pages unless they held something damning?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the final threads. "Suspicion is a seed, my dear. Plant it, and it grows. We must see what blooms." As the storm subsided, leaving the village sodden but resolute, Miss Marple knew the time for confrontation was near. The clues, arsenic, foxglove, a hidden diary, a sick cat, pointed to Lydia, but the net must be cast carefully. Like fishing in the mead, she thought, you wait for the right moment to pull the line. The village held its breath, the storm's echoes mingling with the whispers of murder, as Miss Marple prepared to draw the truth into the light. Chapter 6. The Unmasking. The storm that had battered St. Mary Mead for days relented at last, leaving behind a village washed clean, its cobblestones gleaming under a pale, uncertain sun. Yet the air remained charged, as if the very meadows held their breath, sensing the culmination of the mystery that had gripped Willow Cottage. The whispers of poison, hidden diaries, and buried vials had woven a web of suspicion around Lydia Hargreaves. But Miss Jane Marple knew that webs could be fragile things, easily torn by haste or miscalculation. The truth, she believed, lay in the quiet details. The flick of a glance, the tremor of a hand, the echo of a word spoken in fear. Her cottage, where the fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, and Tiberius dozed fitfully on a cushion, Miss Marple prepared for the final act. Her tea party had stirred the pot, revealing cracks in Lydia's composure and Reginald's growing unease. The diary, the arsenic, the foxglove in the herb bed, These were no mere coincidences, but threads in a tapestry of deceit. Yet other figures clouded the pattern. Mrs. Potts with her grievances, Mr. Croft with his predatory demands, even Dr. Haydock's reluctance to challenge the inquest's verdict. "It's like a village pageant," Miss Marple murmured to Tiberius. Her knitting needles paused. "Everyone plays a part, but only one holds the script." Her plan was simple yet bold. A gathering at Willow Cottage, ostensibly to discuss the future of Eleanor's beloved garden, but, in truth, a stage to draw out the truth. She penned a note to Inspector Slack, whose brusque efficiency she respected despite his impatience for her methods. "Dear Inspector," she wrote in her neat spidery hand, "I believe new evidence in Mrs. Hargreaves's death warrants your attention. Please join us at Willow Cottage this evening at 7. Yours, Jane Marple." She dispatched young Tommy Pierce to deliver it, knowing Slack's curiosity would outweigh his skepticism. The day passed in a flurry of preparations. Miss Marple enlisted Dolly Bantry to spread word of the gathering, framing it as a community effort to honour Eleanor's legacy. "It's brilliant, Jane," Dolly said, her eyes sparkling as they arranged flowers in Miss Marple's parlour. "You're luring them all into one room, like herding cats. But what if Lydia bolts?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, adjusting a vase of chrysanthemums. "Cats don't bolt when they think they're the hunter, Dolly. Lydia believes she's outwitted us all. Let her come, and we'll see what slips." By evening the stage was set. Willow Cottage's drawing room, with its faded chintz curtains and the faint cocoa stains still marring the carpet, glowed under the soft light of oil lamps. The rain had ceased, but a damp chill lingered, seeping through the windows as the guests assembled. Reginald arrived first, his face drawn, his tie slightly askew, as if he'd dressed in haste. Lydia followed, her elegance undimmed in a deep green dress that set off her raven hair, though her eyes held a wary glint. Mrs. Potts, clutching her ever-present handbag, hovered near the door, her expression a mix of fear and determination. Dr. Haydock, pipe in hand, exuded a cautious curiosity, while Mr. Croft, summoned from London at short notice, lounged in an armchair with the air of a man who knew more than he said. Inspector Slack, his uniform crisp but his scowl firmly in place, completed the circle, muttering about wasting police time. Miss Marple entered last, her slight figure almost lost in the room's shadows, her demeanour as unassuming as ever. She carried a small basket of rose cuttings, a nod to the pretext of the gathering, and set it on the sideboard beside the unlabelled tonic bottle she'd noted on her earlier visit. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the room's tension like a needle through silk. "Eleanor Hargreaves loved this cottage, especially its garden. It seems fitting we discuss its future, but first we must address the shadow over her passing. It was no natural death, I'm afraid." The room stilled, the only sound the distant drip of rainwater from the eaves. Reginald's hands clenched on his knees, while Lydia's smile tightened, her fingers smoothing her skirt. Slack snorted, but his eyes sharpened. "Miss Marple, we've been through this." The inquest ruled cardiac failure. No evidence of foul play. Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes meeting his with quiet resolve. "Inquests can be mistaken, Inspector. Let us consider the facts. Eleanor died after drinking cocoa. Cocoa, she said, tasted bitter, with a burning sensation. A stain on this very carpet marks where she fell, gasping in agony. Dr. Haydock, you noted a metallic taste in the cup's dregs, did you not? Haydock nodded reluctantly, puffing his pipe. I did, but it wasn't conclusive. Could have been a quirk of the cocoa tin. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but unyielding, perhaps. But then we have the arsenic, purchased by Mrs. Lydia Hargreaves from Mr. Jenkins's shop, ostensibly for rats in a cellar that Eleanor kept spotless. And the herb bed, where foxglove, digitalis, grows in abundance. A plant that can slow a heart, mimic illness, and kill if misused. Lydia's laugh cut through the air, sharp and brittle. Really, Miss Marple, this is absurd. Are you accusing me of poisoning my mother-in-law? I bought arsenic for vermin, as I said. And foxglove, it's just a flower. You're spinning tales from nothing. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to Reginald, who stared at the floor, his face pale. Miss Marple continued, undeterred. Tales, perhaps, but they fit the pattern. Eleanor's diary, which Mrs. Potts saw in your sewing basket, Lydia with pages torn out. Pages that likely spoke of her intention to change her will, leaving Willow Cottage to a charity rather than Reginald. You learned of this, didn't you? From the diary, or perhaps from Eleanor herself, in one of your late-night talks? Mrs. Potts gasped, her handbag slipping to the floor. It's true, miss. I saw it, hidden away with pages missing. And Eleanor told me she was meeting her solicitor to keep the cottage safe from greedy hands. Lydia's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. Nonsense. I never touched her diary. Mrs. Potts is mistaken, or worse, stirring trouble out of spite. Reginald's head snapped up, his voice hoarse. Lydia, enough. I found the diary myself last night, in your things. You said it was nothing, but it mentioned the will. Why didn't you tell me? His words hung heavy, and Lydia's smile faltered, her hands clenching in her lap. Miss Marple pressed on, her voice calm but relentless. Then there's Tiberius, Eleanor's cat, poisoned after eating something from the herb bed, where a vial shard was found, Mr. Finch tells me. A vial that held, perhaps, a distilled essence of foxglove, used to weaken Eleanor's heart before the arsenic in her cocoa delivered the final blow. The cat was a test, wasn't it, Lydia? To ensure the dose was right. Croft, who had been silent, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. This is all very dramatic, Miss Marple, but what's it to do with me? I was here for business, not murder. Miss Marple turned to him, her gaze piercing. Your business, Mr. Croft, pushed Reginald to desperation. You demanded repayment, threatened to ruin him. Perhaps you encouraged haste in securing the cottage's value, but I believe you were a bystander, not the hand that stirred the poison. Slack, growing impatient, stood. Miss Marple, this is speculation. You've got no proof, no vial, no diary, just hearsay. But Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice steady. Proof lies in patterns, Inspector. Consider the burglar, Lydia reported, a convenient excuse when she was caught burning the diary's pages, as young Tommy Pierce saw. And the tonic bottle on the mantel, unlabelled, but with a faint residue of digitalis, I'd wager, if tested. Dr. Haydock, would you agree such a bottle could hold a heart poison? Haydock hesitated, then nodded. It's possible. I'd need to test it, but digitalis could be distilled into a tonic, easily added to a drink. Lydia's composure cracked, her voice rising. This is outrageous. You're accusing me based on flowers and a sick cat? Reginald, tell them it's nonsense. But Reginald's face crumpled, his voice breaking. Lydia, I heard you that night muttering about the diary and the arsenic. I found the tin, hidden in your trunk. What have you done? His words were a plea, and the room fell silent, the weight of his betrayal palpable. Lydia's eyes blazed, her poise shattering like glass. "You fool, Reginald! I did it for us, for the life you promised me. Eleanor was going to give it all away, to some charity. I read it in her diary. She planned to cut you out. A few drops of foxglove in her tea to weaken her, then arsenic in the cocoa. It was so easy. She was old, no one would suspect. And you, with your debts and dreams, you needed me to act." The confession burst forth, like the storm's final thunderclap, stunning the room. Slack, recovering quickly, stepped forward, his cuffs at the ready. "Mrs. Hargreaves, you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Hargreaves. Anything you say may be used against you." Lydia's defiance collapsed, her shoulders sagging as she was led away, her elegance reduced to a hollow shell. Reginald buried his face in his hands, his sobs muffled. Mrs. Potts wept quietly, clutching her handbag, while Croft slipped out, his face unreadable. Dr. Haydock shook his head, muttering about missed signs, and Slack, for once, looked at Miss Marple with grudging respect. "You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. But next time, leave it to the professionals." As the room emptied, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the cocoa stain, a silent testament to Eleanor's final moments. "Human nature," she said softly to Dolly, who had joined her. "It's always the same, isn't it? Greed, ambition, love, twisted into betrayal. Like a play I saw in London, where the heroine killed for a crown. Only here, it was a cottage outside. The village settled into silence, the storm's echoes fading. Willow Cottage stood empty, its windows dark, but Miss Marple knew its secrets were laid bare at last. Truth is a patient guest, she thought, stepping into the night. It waits to be invited in. Chapter 7. Echoes of Justice. The pale sun of late autumn crept over St. Mary Mead casting a gentle glow on the village's thatched roofs and frost-tipped hedgerows. The storm that had raged through the previous week was now a memory, leaving behind a crisp clarity that seemed to mirror the resolution of the tragedy at Willow Cottage. Lydia Hargreaves's arrest had sent ripples through the village, stirring a mix of relief, shock, and quiet vindication among its inhabitants. The whispers that had swirled around Eleanor's death, bitter cocoa, hidden diaries, and poisoned herbs, had coalesced into a stark truth, laid bare by Miss Jane Marple's unerring insight. Yet, as the village settled back into its familiar rhythms, a lingering melancholy hung over the lanes, like the last leaves clinging to bare branches. Miss Marple, seated in her parlour with a cup of chamomile tea and a half-finished scarf on her knitting needles, felt the weight of that melancholy. Tiberius, Eleanor's cat, now a permanent guest, curled at her feet, his soft purring a small comfort against the chill of the season. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the events that had unfolded in the drawing-room of Willow Cottage. Lydia's confession, raw and unbridled, had been a thunderclap, shattering the facade of her polished charm. Yet it was not the confession itself that lingered in Miss Marple's mind, but the human frailties it revealed, greed masquerading as love, ambition cloaked in duty. "It's always the same," she murmured to Tiberius, her needles clicking softly. "Like a pattern in an old quilt, worn but familiar." The village, too, was piecing itself back together. Reginald Hargreaves, broken by his wife's betrayal, had fled to London, leaving Willow Cottage shuttered and silent. The for sale sign that now stood by its gate hammered into the frost-hardened earth, was a stark reminder of his shattered dreams. The villagers speculated over their morning tea and evening pints. Would the cottage be bought by some city developer, turned into the boutique hotel Lydia had envisioned? Or would it remain a relic of Eleanor's quiet life, its roses left to bloom untended? Miss Marple, passing the cottage on her morning walk, paused to touch a fading bloom, its petals curling in the cold. Poor Eleanor, she thought. She wanted only peace, but peace is a fragile thing when greed knocks at the door. The aftermath of Lydia's arrest brought a flurry of activity to St. Mary Mead. Inspector Slack, for all his grumbling, had taken charge with efficiency, ordering tests on the unlabeled tonic bottle Miss Marple had pointed out. The results, delivered to the police station in Much Benham, confirmed her suspicions. Traces of digitalis, distilled from foxglove, mingled with a faint residue of arsenic. The evidence was damning, corroborating Lydia's confession of a two-pronged poison, a slow weakening of Eleanor's heart with foxglove, followed by a lethal dose of arsenic in her cocoa. The diary, recovered from Lydia's sewing basket by a diligent constable, revealed torn pages where Eleanor had written of her intent to bequeath the cottage to a local horticultural charity, a plan that had sealed her fate. Mrs. Potts, freed from the shadow of suspicion, had taken up a new position at the vicarage, where her bustling efficiency was welcomed by Griselda's chaotic household. Yet the housekeeper's eyes still held a haunted look. When she spoke of Eleanor, as if guilt lingered for not acting on that final night's bitter cocoa. Miss Marple, meeting her at the village shop, offered a gentle word. "You did your best, Mrs. Potts. We cannot always see the storm coming, but we can help clear the debris." The housekeeper nodded, clutching a bag of flour, and managed a tremulous smile. Dr. Haydock, too, bore the weight of oversight. Over a glass of sherry at the Blue Boar, he confided to Miss Marple, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air. "I should have pushed harder, Jane. That metallic taste in the cocoa, I dismissed it too quickly. Slack's right. I'm too fond of the easy answer." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "We all miss things, Doctor. But the truth has a way of surfacing, like a bulb in spring. You helped in your way by keeping an open mind. Mr. Croft, the shadowy business partner, had vanished as swiftly as he'd appeared, his sleek car no longer parked outside the cottage. Rumours swirled that he'd cut ties with Reginald, seeking new ventures in Bristol, but Miss Marple suspected he'd known more than he let on. "A vulture, that one," Mr. Pye remarked at the inn, his voice dripping with disdain, "circling for profit, but not bold enough to strike." Miss Marple, sipping her lemonade, agreed silently. Croft's role had been peripheral, a catalyst rather than a killer, but his pressure on Reginald had set the stage for Lydia's deadly act. The village's gossip, ever a living entity, now turned to Lydia's fate. Her trial, set for the spring assizes in London, promised to draw reporters from the city, eager for a tale of rural murder and betrayal. Miss Weatherby, the postmistress, predicted a sensation. "She'll play the tragic heroine, mark my words," she told a cluster of women at the church hall, her knitting needles clacking for emphasis. "All tears and elegance, but the jury won't be fooled." Miss Hartnell, ever severe, sniffed. "She deserves the rope, if you ask me." Poisoning an old woman for a house, disgraceful. Miss Marple, overhearing as she arranged hymnals, said nothing, but her thoughts were less harsh. Lydia's crime was heinous, yet it stemmed from a familiar human failing, a hunger for a life beyond reach, fueled by Reginald's promises and her own restless ambition. "It's like a play I saw in Bath," she later told Dolly Bantry over tea at Gossington Hall. A young woman, dazzled by dreams of grandeur, turned to murder when the curtain threatened to fall. Lydia wanted the spotlight, but she chose a dark stage. Dolly, slicing a fruitcake with gusto, leaned forward. "And Reginald? Do you think he suspected all along, Jane? He seemed so shattered at the end." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes thoughtful. "Reginald is a weak man, Dolly. Swayed by stronger wills, first his father's, then Lydia's. I believe he sensed something amiss, but love or fear blinded him until the truth was undeniable. I recall a curate in my youth, much the same, devoted to a wife who poisoned for profit. He wept at her trial, yet never saw the signs." The conversation turned to the cottage's future, a topic that preoccupied the village. The horticultural charity, informed of Eleanor's thwarted wishes, expressed interest in preserving the garden as a memorial, perhaps even opening it to visitors. Mr. Finch, the gardener, was consulted, his gruff exterior softening at the prospect. "Mrs. Hargreaves would have liked that," he told Miss Marple, clipping a rose for her. "Her roses, her herbs, they were her heart. I'll tend 'em if they'll have me." Miss Marple smiled, tucking the rose into her basket. "They'd be fortunate to have you, Mr. Finch. A garden is a living legacy, after all." Yet not all was resolved. The mystery of the anonymous letter, urging Miss Weatherby to check the apothecary's records, remained unsolved. Miss Marple suspected young Tommy Pierce, whose sharp eyes and sharper tongue had caught many a village secret, but he denied it with a grin that suggested mischief rather than malice. "Someone wanted the truth out," Miss Marple mused to Dolly. "In a village, secrets are like seeds, sown in darkness, they sprout in the light." As winter loomed, Miss Marple took to walking past Willow Cottage daily, noting the slow decay of its untended garden. The roses, once Eleanor's pride, drooped under the weight of frost, their petals falling like tears. One morning, she found a small posy left on the gate, tied with a ribbon and bearing a note in an unfamiliar hand, for Eleanor, who loved this place. It was unsigned, but the gesture spoke of quiet remorse, perhaps from a villager who had known her in her solitary years. Tiberius, now thriving under Miss Marple's care, became a fixture in her parlour, his green eyes watchful as she knitted by the fire. "You knew, didn't you?" she said to him one evening, her voice soft. "Animals always do. Like that dog in Lumouth, who howled the night his master died. You tasted the poison meant for Eleanor, and you survived to tell the tale." The cat blinked, as if in agreement, and Miss Marple chuckled. "We make a fine pair, you and I, watchers of the world's small cruelties." The village, too, watched and healed. The Blue Boar's patrons debated Lydia's trial over their pints, while the church hall buzzed with plans for a spring fete to benefit the charity. Miss Weatherby, ever the hub of news, reported that Reginald had been seen in London, pale and subdued, lodging in a modest boarding house. "He's a broken man," she told Miss Marple, sorting letters. "No cottage, no wife, no dreams. Serves him right, leaning on that schemer." Miss Marple, arranging stamps, nodded thoughtfully. "He leaned, yes, but Lydia pushed. It's a lesson, isn't it? We choose our partners, but not always their paths." Her mind drifted to a long-ago friend, a gentlewoman who married a charming rogue, only to find herself entangled in his crimes. Human nature, she added, is a garden of its own, full of weeds and wonders. As the first snowflakes dusted St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat by her window, watching the lights of distant cottages flicker like stars. Willow Cottage remained dark, its future uncertain, but its story had reached its end. Justice, quiet and unyielding, had prevailed, as it so often did in the hands of those who saw beyond the surface. Like pruning a rose, Miss Marple thought, her needles resuming their rhythm. You cut away the dead wood to let the blooms thrive. The village slept, its secrets laid to rest, but Miss Marple knew that new stories waited in the wings, ready to unfold in the timeless dance of human folly and redemption.